interviewed me for the Washington Post, and that was exactly the title of it. Rana Ayoob is the bravest woman around, the woman journalist I know. And she goes on. I got a message from her yesterday that a new case, a first information report, has been ordered by a court against her writings, and she faces that threat. And yet she goes on, showing that people like that can, if you stand up, I think that's the way to fight this assault and this repression. And she's, I think, an extraordinary case. Fortunately, she's able to write for the Washington Post and some other publications abroad. She's respected. And I think we need people like that, and there are some others as well.
I suppose the Indian government will immediately latch onto that idea that she's now writing for an outside, a foreign media organization, and say, there is a problem here, that some of our journalists are more interested in making a noise outside the country than being a part of our country. It's interesting that Reporters Without Borders, an international organization, talks about India now ranking only 159th out of 180 countries when it comes to press freedom. And they talk about a series of different incidents in which they say, according to research, in the last decade or so, 20 journalists have actually been murdered.
Yes, in connection with their work.
In India, yes.
Yes.
But I suppose my question to you is, for most journalists, most of the time, seeking to dig out truths about power, are you now suggesting to me that they live in fear of their lives?
A lot of them live in fear of their liberty, because they're using anti-terrorism laws or just, subversive activities laws. That is, instead of the old sedition law, which was stayed by the Supreme Court, now they've introduced a new law. So they are living in fear of loss of liberty. Lives, of course, 20 is very bad. The previous decade was 10. You're looking at journalists who were murdered in connection with their work, because of their work, because particularly investigative work in different parts of the India. And what is worse is, India figures in the Global Impunity Index brought out by CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, which means the cases are not resolved one way or the other. Neither it doesn't progress, which means there's a cover-up.
Well, it certainly means we can't draw conclusions about who was responsible for those deaths.
One of the arguments of the critics is there is deterrence. The Godi media has arisen because of this fear of reprisals.
You seem to be convinced that the government is using extreme measures to surveil journalists and civil society activists who are trying to uncover awkward truths about the use of power. You say that illegal surveillance has involved spyware bought, you allege, by the Indian government from an Israeli software company, the software known as Pegasus,
yes,
which has been used in other parts of the world too. Now, the government has adamantly denied this. I've seen that the Home Minister Amit Shah has described it as an international conspiracy to malign Indian democracy and defame India. So where's your proof?
The proof is, I think there have been stories. This is the NSO Group's military-grade spyware Pegasus, and I'm a petitioner in the Supreme Court of India. In fact, in the court, the government refused to confirm or deny that it had acquired this spyware, and so on. And it just refused. The court could have compelled it, and we were disappointed it didn't. But it set up a committee, which then reported on it. It's kept in a sealed cover.
Sure. You don't have proof this is happening.
There's a strong suspicion, and other countries have investigated it. The New York Times did a story on this, pretty much indicating that this had been used. There have been, the Wire did investigations on this.
To be brutal about it, do you think they're surveilling you?
I don't think so. Because I'm not an actor.
Do you think they're surveilling?
Because I'm very open about what I do.
Colleagues of yours doing investigative work for The Hindu, challenging power, do you think they may well be being surveilled?
I wouldn't generalize about it. I think it's very targeted, selectively targeted. Sometimes they miss the targets. They don't know who to target. So it's not that efficient a system. But there was evidence to show that, there were indications And the Supreme Court went up to a certain point by appointing a committee headed by a retired Supreme Court judge. And that committee gave its report, which has not been published.
We haven't seen that report. Let me ask you a broader question about the way the media is working in India today. You are seen as very much an old school journalist. You rose through the ranks at the Hindu, and you've been awarded prizes for your own investigative work going back to the 80s and 90s. But I would say, and I'm sure you'd agree, the media has changed transformationally in the last few years, and so much of it now is being done online, not by the old media groups such as yours, but by individuals who have massive followings on platforms like YouTube. And the truth is that India isn't stopping critical voices, some of whom, like Ravish Kumar, now have 10 million and more subscribers on YouTube. So where's the repression there?
They are trying to stop that. They're struggling to see what can be done there. The new broadcast services bill was introduced. There was opposition, so it's been referred to a committee because the government has no majority. And maybe some of its allies have problems or qualms about it.
But isn't this precisely the point, that India is a noisy, vibrant democracy where efforts to constrain voices like Ravish Kumar's actually aren't as successful as those in power might wish?
I fully agree with this. And I had had Dhruv Rathi, who's not a journalist. He was a sort of an educator on YouTube. And he then put out something that went viral called Is India a Democracy? And then he had a sequel, and I believe 50 million views.
You talk about the desire of the government to push new legislation to exercise more control in the sort of online information space. And, we've seen a Telecommunications Act in this country. We've seen a Personal Data Protection Act. There's still work on a Broadcasting Services Bill, which you just referred to, which might put new controls on the YouTubers. But the government's defense of all these new measures is quite simple. This is the words of the Minister of Information. He says we need new legal frameworks to ensure accountability and safeguard the social fabric of the nation in this new digital era. And he has a really important point, doesn't he? Misinformation in a country like India, with its divisions, with its tensions, is profoundly dangerous.
The ruling party, the BJP, with direct or indirect support from the government, central government, union government, and the state governments where they are in power, is the prime generator of disinformation in this country. You could have seen what happened in the election, but what they say about Rahul Gandhi, about Arvind Kejriwal, and so on. Not that the others don't do it, but they don't do it on the same scale. So disinformation is perhaps after the United States of America. India is a country that has been plagued more than any other country by organized, systematic disinformation.
But I guess what I was getting at is not the government use of the information space, but the fact that we see in India at times of particular local crisis, for example, in a tragic rape case going back to 2015, and then in other cases where Muslims have been accused of slaughtering cows, there have been online pylons and the spread of rumor and misinformation, not by the government, but by people in communities who are engaging in, frankly, hate speech and fueling tensions in communities. The government says that its legislative proposals are designed to control and stop that. Doesn't India need that?
If that were the sincere motivation, then I would have no problem with it. But then along with that comes anything that questions the government's policies or anything against Prime Minister Modi is seen as unacceptable, and they invoke laws which make it in cases and have filed cases which make it impossible for you to get, or very, very difficult to get bail. But sometimes the high courts give relief. That's the bright side. Unexpectedly, even in Gujarat or in Kashmir, journalists have been released unexpectedly. But they're really using it to muzzle resent any criticism, particularly of the Prime Minister and the Home Minister and the ruling party.
You, throughout this conversation, have been deeply critical of Mr. Modi and his policies on the media. The truth is, Mr. Modi is an extraordinarily popular politician in this country who has been in power thanks to an electoral mandate for more than a decade. Isn't the truth that you just deeply resent the fact that he, a bit like Donald Trump in America, understands how to connect with voters using the new media in ways that you old media tapes just can't stand?
The problem with that is, dictators, authoritarian leaders, strongmen have historically appealed to popular sovereignty, that we represent the people. I don't want to go back to extreme examples, so I'll restrain myself on that point. But you appeal to popular sovereignty, you demonstrate that I have the streets. You mentioned Trump, Modi, and there are many others as well. Indira Gandhi was one such. But that is no argument for stifling democracy and freedoms and the independent.
No, but here's what he says. He says that the media in India